So I started following this guy on Instagram the past month or so. His Instagram name is SB Mowing. Has anybody watched this guy? He's amazing. He goes to houses where the weeds are just so overgrown, and he goes and he'll knock on the door, and sometimes people don't even live there anymore, but most of the time they do. And it's either a widow, who can't take care of her house anymore, or somebody else who's just going through some hardships. And he just says, "Hey, can I mow your lawn for free and do a trim up and all that stuff?" And seeing the way he does it, like watching at quadruple speed, I feel like I've accomplished so much just watching him and what he does. It's pretty amazing. But to see the transformation from like what it was to what it then is at the end. Now, if you've been here for a while, you've probably heard me talk about how much I love gardening. Or actually, I don't. I hate gardening. I hate weeds. I hate doing all that stuff. But it's part of life, right? We got to do it. If you're a homeowner, you got to take care of your yard, I guess. I don't know if you want to be a good neighbor. But it didn't help that the house we bought, the previous people were retired. They had all the time on their hands. So they had like 17 garden beds. And so now I'm trying to take care of this house. And every spring, when it starts to get nice out, I go outside and I say, this is the year I'm going to stay on top of it. This is the year I'm going to take care of my yard. This is the year, man. Home and Garden magazine is going to call me up and say, hey, we saw your yard. We want you on the front cover. Like, I'm going to take care of this yard. And every single year, by the time it hits summer and things just keep growing, I lived in Arizona for 2 years. Nothing grows there. And now here it's like you just blink and everything's grown again. And so every summer it hits a point where I'm like, I can't do this, man. I got to call somebody, and then nobody wants to do it. So I'm all right, I'm just going to do it myself. But I would walk outside and there's one garden bed. I'm able to kind of do most of it. There's always at least one garden bed that I walk by every single day. And I think I got to get to that. I got to deal with, if I just every single day just bent over and picked up a couple weeds, it'd be fine. But instead I say, I'll get to it tomorrow. And tomorrow never comes, because then the next day I'm like, I'm going to get to it the next day. And by the time I finally get to it, the weeds have grown so tall that I need like 3 wheelbarrows to get them away. The weeds have grown so deep and intertwined with healthy plants that it starts to choke the life out of them. Now, how many of you know today we're not talking about weeds, right? We're talking about offense. What we're talking about is conflict. And the reality is that conflict is kind of like weeds. Every day you can walk by a conflict and say, I can address that now, or I can just pretend it doesn't exist. And you keep walking by it, and eventually those conflicts start to grow and grow. They grow taller, they grow deeper, and you see it, they see it, everybody sees it, but you're like, no, I'm not going to address that until it starts to choke the life out of your marriage, choke the life out of your relationships, choke the life out of your friendships, out of your coworkers. Everybody knows there's conflict, but nobody wants to deal with it. And if there's one thing that is constant in life, it is conflict. So one thing that is constant. From the day you're born and you're crying to your mommy, right? There's conflict there. To the day you die, there is going to be conflict. As you open the pages of the Bible, there's only 2 chapters of the Bible that are conflict-free. It's the very first 2 chapters. In Genesis 1 and 2, there's a garden. And there's no overgrowth. There's no weeds. Everything is in its right place. And God created Adam. He created Eve. And he said it was very good. Everything was perfect. But what happened is Adam and Eve, they ate the fruit from the tree that they weren't supposed to eat from. And then when God questions Adam, what does Adam say to God? He says, it's the woman you put here with me. It's her fault. Right? And that's the very first excuse that we see in the Bible for conflict. It's not my fault, it's Eve's fault. And Eve said, it's not my fault, it's the serpent's fault. And so there's just blame shifting. And then fast forward, they get kicked out of the Garden of Eden. And what happens with their kids? Cain, their son, there's conflict with his brother Abel, and he kills and murders his brother. And you just continue through the stories of the Bible. It's just conflict after conflict after conflict. And so we got to learn how do we deal with conflict? Because at the root of conflict is offense. It's anger. It's betrayal. It's anger and it's offense. And so we're in this series called No Offense. And we've been saying over the past few weeks that how do we live in this world where it feels like Everyone's on edge. Man, I think the offense has just been ramped up, especially with some recent events that have taken place where the world is so offended. And yet, I feel, maybe you feel, that Christians can be at the top of the list of the most offended people. And so how do we live in this world to choose to have no offense in our lives? It starts, we've got to know how to address and deal with conflict. Let's recap where we've been throughout this series. In week 1, we said this, that James, in his book, his letter to the church, he says, human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires, but love does. Not even righteous anger. God is equipped and qualified to carry righteous anger, but human anger does not accomplish what we want it to. It doesn't make us more loving, more joyful, more peaceful, but love does. That is to be our motive in this world. And last week, here's what we said. We said, when it comes to our anger, don't let the sun go down while you're still angry. Get rid of your anger while it's still today. Deal with it today, and you'll heal from it tomorrow. That's what we said last week. And so today, what I want to talk about is how do we deal with our anger? And next week, we're going to talk about how to heal from things that have happened to us. But today, how do we deal with our anger? How do we deal with our offense? How do we deal when people have offended us, or maybe even when we've offended other people? And as always, you can scan the QR code, be brought to the YouVersion Bible app, and follow along with some of the sermon notes from today. But this is the question I want us to wrestle with. How do we, and it kind of ultimately is asking this question, how do we pursue peace in our relationships with people? How do we pursue peace in our marriage when there's conflict? How do we pursue peace with our roommates when we're not happy with the way that they're picking up, or lack thereof, their laundry? How do we how do we pursue peace at work when there's conflict around the water cooler? That's what we're talking about today, where the rubber meets the road. And really, Paul paints this picture for us of what we're called to do. Like, whether you like it or not, we are called to live at peace with everyone. That's what Romans 12 says in verse 18. He says, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with who? With everyone. Not just the people you like, not just the people that it's easy to get along with. Live at peace with everyone. How many of us find this to be challenging in certain days of the week, certain times with certain people? But he says, if it is possible, live at peace. What that doesn't mean, to live at peace doesn't mean there's no conflict in my life. Living at peace doesn't mean that I just sweep things under a rug. Here, I'm going to try to adjust my microphone. It's kind of popping a lot. All right, is that better? Hopefully that's better. Anyway, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. So here's what Paul's showing us is it's not always possible, right? There are situations where reconciliation and living at peace with others is not possible. Living at peace means that I'm reconciled to God and reconciled to other people. And that's ultimately what peace is, but it's not always possible. Sometimes it's impossible. Sometimes I can do everything in my power, as much as it depends on me, to live at peace with others, but they're not reciprocating that peace. Because here's the reality, is forgiveness depends on you, but reconciliation depends on two. Right? Forgiveness is a one-sided equation. It is you choosing to forgive the other person. You can do that without the other person even knowing about it. But reconciliation, what we're talking about, pursuing peace with other people, that depends on two people, two parties, two separate entities saying, we're going to work through this thing and we're going to work and come together. However, I want to make very, very, very clear today that sometimes reconciliation isn't just impossible, but it's unhealthy. All right, if you're in an abusive relationship, reconciliation is not healthy for you to just take that and to stay in that place. Because here's the reality, living at peace is not living in proximity. I can live at peace with someone and not stay in a relationship. I can live at peace with someone across the country, across whatever, right? Living at peace is not living in proximity, meaning I have to stay in that relationship. I have to be with that person. So if you're in an abusive marriage, you can live at peace from a distance. It's okay to say, I'm leaving, right? I'm taking the kids with me. Like if you're in a truly abusive relationship, you can live at peace and not be in proximity to that person. If you're dating someone, you realize this is not the right person for me. Living at peace doesn't mean that we're still going to call each other every single day. We broke up, but we're still going to call. We're still going to, I'm supposed to live at peace, right? No, you can live at peace from a distance from that person. Living at peace doesn't mean that I don't have any healthy boundaries with my mother-in-law or my kids, or that I don't have healthy boundaries with other people in my life. No, you can have peace and live not in proximity. All right, just so we're all clear on what that means, right? So how do we pursue peace? Like if we're truly going to live reconciled to other people, it starts with this first thing, is knowing the root, all right? Knowing the root of our offense, knowing the root of our bitterness, of our anger. Because James, once again, he said human anger does not produce the righteousness of God, but he also says in chapter 4, this right here, he says, what causes quarrels? What causes conflict? What causes fights among you? What causes these arguments among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? The word passions is this word desire. And it's not a negative word. It's a neutral word, meaning there are good and healthy passions, and then there are bad and unhealthy passions, right? There are good desires that we have, and there are bad desires that we have. But he's talking about this kind of neutral desire. It could be good, could be bad. They're not all wrong, but he's saying that's where conflict comes from, is when I want something and I'm not getting it. And he goes on, he says this, you desire and do not have. So what do? You murder. You covet and you cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. And all the wives in here say, but I don't want to have to ask. I want him to just do it because he wants to do it, right? Amen? Can I get an applause? No. But you do not have because you do not ask. As human beings, when we have desires and we hold people to certain standards in our mind, but if we don't share those standards with others, then we start to desire. And that desire can start to turn into other things. It could start to lead to coveting, to fighting, to quarrel, and maybe even murder. Right? We're living in a world where rather than talking about the desires that I have, it's easier to pull the trigger. And so whether it's in a marriage where you're upset with your spouse for something, or maybe as husbands, like we're not off the hook either. All right, let's say as husbands, if you want your wife to start to initiate something in your marriage, to start to, initiate a certain thing, how many guys would say, well, rather than ask for it, I'm just going to hold this back. I'm just going to see how long it takes look at this body, right? She can't resist this, right? And has it ever worked, right? The reality is because we do not ask, we don't have. Right? Maybe it's if you got roommates in your house and they just keep leaving their dishes in the sink and you're just, grunting as you're cleaning their dishes, hoping they hear your grunts. Oh, I wish, maybe it's your kids. Like, I wish they would notice how much I'm doing for them. You do not have because you do not ask. And instead of resenting others, why not just voice your concerns? But what we have to be careful of is when our desires can become demands. Where I want this thing, but now I'm manipulating or I'm controlling other people, and maybe I'm setting standards that are unattainable for other people to ever fulfill. Or maybe I'm expecting things of my spouse or my kids or other people in my life that I should be finding in God. All right, so our desires can turn into demands, and it just leads to further disputes and disagreements and division. And so we got to know the root. We got to know what do I want? Why am I offended by this thing? It's because there's something in me that wants something out of this relationship, out of this person, out of this expectation. So knowing the root. But then the second thing is we got to know the right steps to take to pursue peace, to deal with our conflict? What are the right steps? Now, we know the wrong steps because we default towards them all the time. When it comes to peace, you can be a peace faker, you can be a peace breaker, or you can be a peacemaker. Some of us, man, we're really good at faking the peace. Oh, there's no conflict. What are you talking about? Everything's good. Just sweep it under a rug. Peace breakers, man, we gossip, we slander, we do all kinds of things. But how few of us are actually working towards making peace with other people? There's an excellent book on this called Peacemakers by Ken Sand. And he's got a graphic in the book called The Slippery Slope. And what he talks about, these are the peace faking responses, which are called the escape responses. And there's the peace breaking responses, which are the attack responses. Some of us lean more towards one side or the other, but it's a slippery slope because as it gets into some of this unhealthy territory, it's easy for it to just start to slide and to get further and further away from healthy conflicts and healthy relationships. And so the escape responses, you got denial. That's the person who said, there's no conflict. What are you talking about? Everything's fine. There's nothing. I don't need to deal with anything, right? Which then leads into flight, where now I'm going to avoid that person. Oh, that person I have conflict with, I know that they shop at that grocery store. So it's fine. I'm just going to get a new grocery store. I don't need to go to that place anymore, right? Or maybe in a marriage, like I'm just going to pull away from my spouse. I'm going to pull away from that person. Or a coworker, we're going to have to work separate hours because I can't see that person anymore. Flight. And you might not even tell that person that you're upset, but you're in denial, and that leads to flight. And sometimes if you're in an abusive relationship, that's actually a valid response to say, I'm going to pull away. I can't be in relationship. But far too many of us, we do that with people that aren't abusive, with people that we really should be engaging in it with. And lastly, it moves to suicide. Where there's no hope, I don't want to even deal with the situation. I don't want to deal with life. And so many teenagers and young adults, we're seeing this happen because they don't know how to deal with conflict and with reality. We haven't trained them and equipped them to know how to go about peacemaking. And so it's easier to just pull away, to move from denial to flight, and finally to end it. And so this is real. We've got to deal with our offenses because otherwise we just move towards those faking responses. But the other side is just as guilty. And some of us, we lean more towards this direction where assault, right? We're going to attack the person with words, maybe behind their back. I think a Christian's favorite shape is the triangle. Triangulation, when we go to one person about the other person and we say, can you believe what they just said about that thing? Can you believe? But then we go to this person. Oh, I was talking to that person. They said some things about you. And it's this triangle. Instead of going directly to the person that you have an offense with, we build a case against other people. And in the church, we don't call it gossip. We call it prayer requests, right? Hey, pray for sister, this person. Right? She's really struggling in her marriage, right? Pray for this, right? But we assault people with words. We assault people maybe with our fists. And so we can move in that direction. And then that moves to litigation, where now I'm going to get legal help involved because we've got to now take this person down. I'm going to take them to court. I'm going to sue them. I'm going to take legal action against them. And if that doesn't work, then there's always murder. There's always moving in that direction where I'm so angry with this person that I would murder them. And before we all write that off as, well, that's not me. What did Jesus say? If you've had anger in your heart with your brother, you've committed murder in your heart. How many of us, rather than dealing with our offense, we're so angry with people that we've already basically murdered them in our minds. And so if these are the faking and the breaking responses, what are the peacemaking responses? And here's the good news, guys. Jesus didn't just leave us here to figure it out on our own. He didn't just drop us off on this planet and say, good luck. Hope you can work through this conflict. Kicking you out of the garden. Go, you got to figure it out. Jesus actually told us. He outlines it in Matthew 18. This is so brilliant. This is what he says. If another believer sins against you, go privately and point out the offense. right? Don't go to other people about that other person. Go privately and point out the offense. Not in public. Hey, I'm so mad at what you did the other day. I'm just going to share it with everybody. No, privately point out the offense. But notice he says, if it's another, what? Believer. So part of this is understanding the context and the person that I'm offended by. If I'm offended by a believer, Paul writes in 1 Corinthians, he says, you're not to judge those outside the church, but you're to judge those inside the church. Those inside the church, we're holding each other to certain standards and ethics. But those outside the church, man, we shouldn't hold them to those standards. He's saying if another believer sins against you, but if an unbeliever sins against me, why would I hold them to Christian standards if they don't follow Jesus? And so it's not my responsibility to go to unbelievers and point out privately their offenses towards me. It's my responsibility to give grace and to love them and to inspire them, show them a different way by the words that I use, by choosing to overlook their offenses. If another believer, though, sins against me, Jesus says it is my responsibility to go privately. And if the other person listens and confesses it, you've won that person back. What a blessing that I've seen this happen so many times in this church. I have experienced it. You've experienced it where, man, you heard someone say something and you go and talk to them. You realize, oh, they weren't upset about that one thing. They were upset about something else completely. There was a situation that happened last Sunday where somebody left the service and they were offended before we even got to the message because of something that someone said to them. They left the service, they went out to their car and they were ready to drive home. But you know what they did? They came back inside. The person that said something to them, they apologized. And they said, I'm sorry, I have to leave right now. And the person said, you don't have to leave. He's like, no, I have to leave. So they drove home. I got a message this week, and the person that was offended that left the service said, man, I was so upset. Can you just help me understand where this other person was coming from when they said that? And I said, yeah, let's talk it through. And then I said, but did you hear what the sermon was about? It's about not getting offended. And here's the reality. I think the devil wanted you to get offended. He wanted to break you away from community. And he said, yeah, my family and I were thinking of never coming back to Faith Church again. I'm like, that's what the devil wants. He wants us to just get to believe things about other people. And suddenly when I was able to help this person understand where the other person was coming from, they said, can you please apologize? And they worked through it. And that's the beauty of what this can do, where we can win people back to each other. We can mend and heal broken relationships. But Jesus says, if you're unsuccessful, take one or two others with you and go back again, so that everything you say may be confirmed by 2 or 3 witnesses. If it doesn't work at the one-on-one, then just bring a third party. Bring someone who can help you mediate that conflict. Bring someone who can help you work through that together. And if that doesn't work, if the person still refuses to listen, take your case to the church. And I pray we never have to get to this stage. And it's been very few situations where it's even been contemplated that we've had to do this. But he says, take it to the church, and then if he or she won't accept the church's decision, treat that person as a pagan. Which, again, how would I treat an unbeliever? I would give grace. I would overlook offenses, right? But it doesn't mean that they're going to have the same proximity to me, but I'm going to treat that person with grace, with love, with forgiveness. And so back to the Peacemakers graphic, there's so much in here I wish we had time to get into. But, overlooking is the first response we can have, is we can choose to actually overlook. Proverbs 19:11, we read a couple weeks ago, says it is one's glory to overlook an offense. Rather than getting offended by everything, to overlook. And when you can't overlook, then to move towards reconciliation, to take the steps that Jesus took. Negotiation, media. We don't have time to get into all of these, but building towards accountability. Where as a church, we're going to hold that person accountable because they refuse to listen, right? The question remains, though, how do I know when to overlook and when to address the offense? And I'll tell you, that's some of the hardest decisions to make as an individual? How do I know if this is something I can overlook or whether this is something that I need to address? Because so many of us, we're so quick to attack and to really feel like this is my responsibility. I got to point out all of the ways that others are not living up to my demands and my expectations for community and for accountability and for all of these things. So how do we know when I can overlook versus when I should actually address that situation? So we got to know the root, right? We got to know the right steps. But the last thing here, the third thing is we need to know what to remove. Jesus says in Matthew 7:3, he says, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the log, the plank that's in your eye? Man, some of us, we're just got this huge log in our eye. And we're like, brother, you got something in your eye. Can I help you with that? And he's like, are you kidding me? Do you see the hypocrisy? Do you see what's in your eye? He goes on. He says, how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, right? If someone was coming at me, like a surgeon was coming at me, hey, I'm going to do surgery today. I'd be like, no, you are not. Get away from me. And all the while, there's a plank in your own eye. You hypocrite, Jesus says. First, take the plank out of your own eye. Then you'll see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Rather than saying, I'm so offended by everything that person said. Well, maybe did I say something offensive to them? I'm so offended that person, man, the way that they just spoke to me, but maybe I said some hurtful words to them. All right, whatever it is, take the plank out of your own eye. And so it starts with this: confess before you address. We got to confess the things, the logs in our own eye before we address what's in others' eyes. Because the reality is, man, when it comes down to it, I might be worse than the person I'm offended by. I might be worse than them. You might be worse than the person you're offended by. Because here's the reality. The God of the universe doesn't have a speck in his eye. And we're walking around with logs in ours, offended by all of the other people with the things that they need to deal with. And did God point out our logs? Does he look at us and say, you really need to work on that? You're a terrible human being. I'm so ashamed of you, my child. I'm so sick of the way. No. He says, man, I've removed your sins as far as the east is from the west. You got a log in your eye. So why don't we include that in it? Why don't we sweep that away? The God of the universe had every right to just say, you know what, plan B, Earth didn't work out, Earth 2.0, we're going to try that. And yet, even when we were cast from the garden, Jesus is still working. He's still weeding things out of our lives. He's still actively concerned with our conflicts, and he loves us. He's inviting us to do the same in our lives. And so how do we deal? How do we deal with our offense? It starts by knowing the root. We've got to know what am I offended by? What do I want? What's getting in the way? And then the second step is to know the right steps to take. Know your default is the wrong steps. Maybe it's peace faking, or maybe it's peace breaking. Maybe it's silence or violence, but choosing instead, I'm going to take the right steps to either overlook this offense or to address it in the right kind of way, without doing the triangulation, without sharing prayer requests that aren't mine to share. And then third is to know what to remove. It's to examine my life. This is Psalm 139 says, search me, O God. See if there's anything in me that offends you. And what if we did that before we remove others' specks from their eyes? We just said, God, search me. See if there's something in me that offends you. And help me to walk in the right path for you. And today's Group Link Sunday, and maybe some of us are like, man, that's so exhausting. It would be easier to just live alone, right? Wouldn't it just be so much easier? Man, if I just, without other people, the people are the people that exhaust, I don't need people in my life. If you've ever been in an argument with your spouse, you probably had the thoughts, like, this would be easier if it was just me. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you don't even want to admit that. But how many of us would say, man, this would be easier if I could just do my life alone because I know how to run my life and I don't need other people coming in and trying to interrupt that. And I'll tell you, that heart attitude, that's what God wants to break in us. He wants to open us up from rather than being offended by every little thing. He wants us to open ourselves up to understand that there's something else that we need to deal with. There's something else. You know the root, the right steps, know what to remove. But the last is to know the reward. There is reward in community. There is reward in working through offenses with other people and saying, man, what if I actually address this in the right kind of way? Conflict, and the best relationships are on the other side of conflict. Some of us are so conflict averse. We run from conflict. But I believe the best relationships are on the other side of conflict. On the other side of working through these issues and saying, man, maybe I'm not seeing it right, but I got to address this person and talk tentatively with them and say, hey, when you said that, when you did that, it hurt me. So there's other things that, man, there's so much we could get into of like what not to say in conflict. One thing not to say is never quote your pastor in the middle of a conflict. Well, Pastor Matt said that, right? Don't do that. Talk tentatively, restore gently, like use gentle words. Talk about your feelings, not their actions. There are things that we can do, but the reward is this, that, man, how many of us have blind spots in our lives? We're walking around with these logs. And I'll tell you, like, my marriage is the greatest crucible for spiritual formation in my life because I'm walking around like this half the time. And my wife's like, hey, you kind of hurt me the other day. I'm like, really? I'm so sorry, right? You have no idea. When you get in a small group, when you get in community with other people, you surround yourself with other people that can point out your blind spots and say, hey, man, I know you're offended by like all of the things in the news today, but man, how's your marriage going? How's your job going? How are, like lifting our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. So we need community in our lives. Ecclesiastes chapter 4 puts it this way. This is the reward, folks. 2 are better than 1 because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up, but pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Some of us, man, if you fell, who would pick you up? If your tire went flat on the highway, who would pull over to help you? Do you have people in your life? 2 are better than 1. If 2 lie down together, they keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, 2 can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. This is the reward, folks, that we can experience strength in numbers. That we can stand shoulder to shoulder with other people. Well, one thing we say around here is circles are better than rows. Because rows don't know. Do you really know what's going on in the people sitting next to you? When you get in a circle with other people, you can see other people and they can see you. You can start to be known and you can start to have people defend you and hold you accountable. And so here's what I want you to do today. Today's Group Link Sunday. So join a group today. And if you scan this QR code, you can get access to all of the groups that we're offering this fall. Scan this QR code. You can also go right outside. You're going to see the tables out there, but maybe you want a digital version as you're kind of shopping around. But here's the reality is, in a group, you're going to experience. Here's the reality. You're gonna have someone that's going to offend you in your group. Can we just be honest? There's going to be someone in your group that you're like, man, why did I do this? This person, they talk all the time. This person, man, whatever it might be, but it's worth it because there's a reward in it. That person, they might need you to help them just as much as you need them. And so join a group today. We're not asking you to join a group for life. We're not saying, that you got to commit to these people for the next 2 years. We're saying 2 to 3 months until the end of 2025. Test it out. Try a small group and see how that can help you deal with your offense, deal with your anger, deal with the things the desires that you have that might be turning into demands. Would you stand? Father, thank you. Thank you that with no specks in your eyes, you don't hold us accountable to our sins, God. Thank you that you don't hold us accountable to the offenses that we cling to, Jesus, but you invite us to let them go and to, in community, surrender ourselves to help others see to us. God, if we're offended by things, help us to know when to overlook the offense and when to actually address it and deal with it in the right kind of way. God, help us to stop moving towards silence, towards denying that there's conflict at all, and to stop moving towards violence where we're attacking people with our words or with our fists, God, but instead we would choose to live at peace, if it's possible, as much as it depends on us, to live at peace with everyone. And God, next week, as we dive into this topic of forgiveness, Lord, that you would help us to release the people that we have just clung to, that we're holding on to bitterness, and that Jesus, you would open our eyes to see that there are other ways to go about that. God, I pray for our small groups launching this fall, that you would be at the center of every single group. God, as we're launching groups with some new leaders that might feel like they don't know what they're doing, God, I pray you equip them with the words, with the skills that they need to lead their groups and lead them through some of these things, Lord, that all of us would choose to live with no offense. But when we're offended, we would know how to deal with it. In Jesus' name. Everybody said, amen.